Okay, so the topic of today's talk and of this retreat is what is emptiness? Explaining emptiness, how to make sense of emptiness. Those of you who are watching the video online, you can find the text that I will read from Open Heart blog entitled What is Emptiness? How to make sense of emptiness. I've been thinking about this topic actually probably years because it's one of those topics that you really, you kind of have to know what you talk about. I wouldn't feel comfortable. I usually don't talk about things that I don't understand, that I haven't at least partially experienced myself. So I started making my own notes for this talk and ended up writing 3 pages, instead of making brief notes, making a proper explanation of what emptiness means. So I'll just go into reading it. You can follow it in your device if you have the page open. And then if there are some points, I will make brief comments, clarifications. Okay? So, what is emptiness? How to make sense of emptiness? Emptiness in Sanskrit is shunyata. Emptiness is also called selflessness, I-lessness, or me-lessness, anatman, anatta. Emptiness and selflessness refer to the self-empty nature of mind. This is the basis of Buddhist thought and practice. One who has seen his mind to be completely without a self, has mastered the teaching of emptiness, is fully awake, that is, a living Buddha. The main reason why we suffer is the sense of self, Atman in Sanskrit. We have thoughts, emotions, and reactions within our mind, and because of the accumulation of the self-thought, I or me, these mind elements make us convinced that we exist independently as separate entities. This is the basis of delusion and suffering, dukkha. The Buddhist path is concerned with interruption and putting an end to cyclic existence, samsara, through proper understanding of the nature of suffering and through proper yogic effort. Particularly insight meditation, vipassana, also called by different names such as laktong or pragya, is what is unique to Buddhist meditation. According to the teachings of Buddhist masters, vipassana, literally clear seeing, is the key to removing existential confusion, dukkha. Buddhist teachings on emptiness, such as the Heart Sutra, famously states that form is emptiness, emptiness is form. What is the meaning of this? Form refers to any sort of relative phenomena, physical or non-physical. Relative phenomena occurs in one or two ways. 1. External phenomena reflected on the mind, and or 2. Internal mind phenomena. If all phenomena are experienced empty, there is no cause for confusion to arise. If any phenomena appearing in the mind is not experienced as empty, and hence causes self-based reaction, this impulse can and should be used as fuel for vipassana practice. Emptiness cannot be properly understood by contemplating the existence of external things, just such as a chair or a desk. The only way to have a liberating insight is to see that selfing happens in the mind, not somewhere outside. Emptiness needs to be understood through emptiness. Even though impermanence, anicca, and suffering, dukkha, are the other two pillars of Buddha Dharma, it is the insight into the empty nature of mind that liberates, not the other two. Understanding emptiness through insight is crucial for all Buddhist meditators, and in fact to all who suffer of existential confusion. Meditation on emptiness is not difficult or lofty, but simple, grounded, and easy to understand when taught and applied correctly. If the instructions are vague and lack clarity, there will be no result, or it will take unnecessarily long time. Without emptiness insight, it is impossible to make sense of any Buddhist teachings. This is so because all Buddha Dharma is built on realization of emptiness. Insight, awakening, Kensho, Semgo Tropa. If the foundation of emptiness is not solid, there is nothing to build a stable house on. In the long run, not having a proper insight leads to twisted dharma that is harmful and misleading. The importance of direct insight has been stressed by numerous Buddhist masters throughout the existence of Buddhism. Without insight, the non-causal paths such as Zen, Dzogchen, and Mahamudra are impossible to understand. On societal and cultural levels, the lack of experiential understanding of emptiness leads to great numbers of lost practitioners who are unable to have real faith about the Buddhist path. For this reason, the Mahasangha of all beings doesn't reap true benefits through interconnectedness. All practitioners should first and foremost make sure that they understand emptiness through direct experience. How do I know if my understanding of emptiness is right? Insight, awakening, or Kensho means that part of one's deluded, self-based mind becomes permanently deconstructed of the sense of self, me, or I. Figuratively speaking, an insight makes a lasting hole in the wall through which the sight on the other side of the wall becomes easier to see. Without the hole, one is shut behind the wall of self-delusion. An insight has a liberating effect. It makes a notable difference to have even a small hole in the wall instead of having none, because looking through the wall instead of looking at the wall are two very different experiences. Consecutive insights, bhumi openings, after the first one keep making the hole bigger and bigger, and in consequence it becomes easier and easier to see what is behind the wall. When insights are combined with regular daily practice, the outcome is that the separating wall becomes entirely deconstructed. Also, glimpses into the self-empty nature of mind are needed. The difference between a glimpse and insight is that glimpse is not permanent. When the whole is there, our everyday life becomes significantly different. A part of our narrow-minded selfing has been permanently removed, so this cannot not have an effect on our lives. Social relationships, work, creative work, and other things in life are met from a more open-minded and less opinionated place. Because selfing no longer happens the same way it used to, how the mind used to think, feel and react according to the self-based habits, life becomes more direct, more fresh and more intimate. This is the most profound change we can have. There is nothing that can replace selfless insight because nothing else will deconstruct the sense of self. A simple indication that one matures in insight meditation is that one feels clear-minded, open-hearted, fresh and less reactive in everyday life. Practical advice. In open heart, Vipassana is practiced in both Sutra and Tantra forms. Sutra Vipassana refers to the two-part formula for the first awakening and object Vipassana instructions after that. Tantra Vipassana refers to Tibetan heart yoga, which, because of the unique aspects in practice, has the power to generate a whole series of awakenings, bhumi openings, within a relatively short period of time. These awakenings, bhumi openings, are matured bhumi perfection by regular practice over a longer period of time. A practice hint. When selfing happens, pay attention to tensions in the headspace, the area inside the head, pre or post awakening, is the place where the impulse can be effectively seen through. And then there's a quote from Dudjom Lingpa's autobiography. Just as many springs and rivers in all directions merge as one taste in the vast ocean, likewise all teachings without exception can be grouped as relative or ultimate truth. The two truths inseparable are fused within great perfection. If you understand the meaning of a great perfection, you see the truth of the nature of reality. Connection to its vital instructions will carry you to the level of awareness holder. Maybe I'll just start by commenting on what was the short paragraph that is at the end before Dudjom Lingpa's quote, that practice hint. When selfing happens, pay attention to tensions in the headspace. The area inside the head before or after awakening is the place where the impulse can be effectively seen through. As you know, it was also mentioned in the text that for generating specifically the first insight, awakening, first bhumi opening in open heart, we have the two-part formula. And well, most of people here have done it, have had the insight, and so you know that it deals with a lot with the headspace, right? So so that's where the selfing is the strongest. And as I've written, pre or post awakening. So there is this subjective sense of self pre-awakening, before that insight, that clearly there is this self, this sense of me, entityness, sort of like having taken a stance or a foothold right there, right behind the eyes, right? So there is this sort of like a little me, mini me inside the head who looks out through the eyes, listens out through the ears, looks down into the body and lives through the body. Right? Lives through the body meaning like following whatever impulses or whatever you do. So yeah, this area in the headspace is quite rarely pointed out in Vipassana teachings, and it would be immensely helpful. Like I worked so far with about, almost 130 people, helping such a number of people get awakened, and for I think the vast majority of those people realizing that it's actually right there instead of somewhere there. The problem is right here. That is the sort of like the turning point in their processing, and that knot unhooks, unwinds. So it's a very useful pointer. But as I've said here, this instruction, this hint, can be also used afterwards in practice post-awakening. As we were resting there a moment ago, I kind of thought about this and it just occurred to me in my mind that identification with a self-based reaction, it can be partial. Partial identification with some reaction would mean like I feel that there's something there. It's somewhere there in the body, and you feel it and you know it's there. Maybe you want to fight it. Somebody told me a story of a few days ago of being in Australia, and there was this big spider climbing his leg. So he instantly, swiped it away. And it's just like that with partial identification. There can be something here or here or here or somewhere, but it's not here. So it causes disturbance. It causes a partial identification with an emotion. Are you following me? And then there is the full identification, when it reaches all the way up here. So even if you have had the first insight, for example, if there's a strong irritation or strong anger, what do you call this?
Meanders.
What? Meanders. It meanders up here. So it takes that foothold again. That, can you say, standpoint? That place of stance here in the head. And that's the full identification. At that point, it's very, very difficult. Of course, it becomes easier with practice, but at that point it's very difficult to having that reaction, like going like a beast about something, being very irritated, pissed off. You just want to do this and, say F you for the rest of the world or people around you. So it's very difficult at that point to come to the knowing of that. It's possible, but when that reaction has caused a full identification, then it's challenging. Right? So, and whatever that emotion is, can be fear, anxiety, irritation, anger, a lot of options. So as I was thinking this partial identification and full identification, there is a saying to cut the head of the snake. Is that right? cut the head of the snake. So obviously the analogy is that we can have the most poisonous snake in the world, but if we cut the head of it, it's not a problem anymore. Not at all. If there was a black mamba here on the floor, that is very, very dangerous African snake. I saw that in a documentary recently. But if we chop the head of it, having a black mamba on the floor is no problem at all. So it's a perfect analogy for this partial and full identification with a self-based reaction. And that's why I wanted to include it, because it can be very, very useful, has been really useful for me over the years to see that, if we only have the instruction of always looking at whatever causes the self-based reaction from down there, even post-awakening, it might not work. But to check that if it's here, chops the head off the snake. Okay? So let's see. So in my text I explained some of the key terms in Buddhism: shunyata, anatta, emptiness, selflessness. Suffering, existential confusion. I also mentioned that the Buddhist path is concerned with interruption and putting an end to cyclic existence through proper understanding of the nature of suffering and through proper yogic effort. So is concerned with interruption of interrupting the cyclic existence. Do you understand what it means? Interrupting the going around in circles in our mind, going from one self-based thought, emotion, reaction to another one, and another one, and another one, from one type of self to the next, and the next, and the next, going around in different kinds of selves, whether unpleasant or pleasant. So insight means interrupting that cycle, becoming aware that this cycle, this cycling keeps happening. This is a very, very meaningful thing to realize. I've seen many people, realize that when they become aware of their thinking, they say, "Oh, it's the same stuff over and over and over again," and I never quite noticed that. So to begin with, realizing that our selfing, it's the same stuff. It's can be like negative, harmful, destructive, or it can be something less negative, not that strong selfing, but that selfing, that self flavor is still there. And as this cycling keeps happening, I wrote that we have thoughts, emotions, and reactions within our mind, and because of the accumulation of the self-thought, accumulation, building a heap or heaps reactions, and then you know your mind goes through these heaps, these accumulated patterns and habits. Because of the accumulation of the self-thought, I or me, these mind elements make us convinced that we exist independently as separate entities. As separate entities. Like, I think it's like from the Dzogchen point of view, there is no one here. There is none of us here. Not even one of us here. But that's purely from the Dzogchen point of view, Ati Yoga point of view. Complete from the from the point of view that is completely selfless. I've often heard when, and probably you have too, when there is an teaching on emptiness, you probably heard that the instruction concerns or the example about emptiness is given on something like I mentioned a chair or a desk, and deconstructing a chair, for example. Like if you start, it is often said that if you start looking for a chair and start deconstructing it, there is nothing called a chair. Like there is not a thing called chair because it consists of different parts. But I've written that emptiness cannot be properly understood by contemplating the existence of external things, just such as a chair or a desk. The only way to have a liberating insight is to see that selfing happens in the mind, not somewhere else. So this is like a key point, that it actually happens in our mind, in our heads, in our body, in our mind space. So this is something important to understand, and that emptiness needs to be understood through emptiness. What I mean that emptiness needs to be understood through emptiness insight. Even though impermanence and suffering are the other two pillars of Buddhist meditation practice, it is the insight into the empty nature of mind that liberates, not the other two. Even though contemplating impermanence, for example, impermanence, what it means to in our human condition, it means illness, old age, death. You know, we are in an impermanent condition with our physical bodies. But to me, even though I used or reminded myself of mortality many years, it didn't generate insight. It didn't break the knot, unwind the knot of self in the head. Probably did something, you know, it was very helpful, otherwise I wouldn't have done it, reminded myself of mortality, but I have never met anybody who had an insight through contemplating impermanence. Not saying that it's not beneficial, I'm just saying that I never met anybody who woke up contemplating that. In the next several paragraphs, there are, a bit critical points, and these same critical points have been said, by different Buddhist teachers and masters in every generation since the time of the Buddha. But maybe I'll just summarize that we have to know what we are doing, what we are practicing. If the instructions are vague and lack clarity, there will be no result, or it will take unnecessarily long time to get results. I don't remember how many the number is now from the old Dharma Mind Sangha, but there is something like 30-35 people from that group, and I think that there's only one or two of that group of people who haven't yet woken up. So I don't mean disrespect in any way, but I'm just saying that if the instructions are vague and lack clarity, lack precision, then there is the option that there will be no result, or it will take unnecessarily long. I know this from my own experience because I sat like hell for 8.5 years before waking up. So I know through first-hand experience that it can take very, very long time, unnecessarily long, if the instruction is not precise and that you kind of don't understand what you're doing. And this is what I'm trying to clarify with this whole post and this talk, what this emptiness is. So for this group, it's easy to talk about this because all of you had one or more Bhumi openings, awakenings. But maybe if there's somebody watching this from the video, well, I'll just give a brief version of the two-part formula, which I actually already did when speaking about the snake. So when selfing happens, we go into the self-based mode. Something happens in our energy body, in our mind, and our like a field of vision narrows down. Our the flow of energy in the energy body starts to get like a hindered. Does it make sense? Hindered. And you just start to feel tight and stiff. Your stomach twists. You lose a lot of energy. If you have a strong self-based reaction, if you were well rested before and you have a strong self-reaction, you are drained of energy vitality in 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Your body heats up too much, becomes very hot, your eyes start to get really tired, dry, mouth goes dry. My mouth is dry actually right now. Am I having a self-based reaction here? So anyway, you know all about the symptoms of becoming a self, becoming a me, becoming a separate entity from everything else. So what this insight or emptiness means, being in that not so you are squeezed tight in a knot of self as an entity. Like this. But then, if you can, and everybody can, Even if you're the most grumpy bastard there is walking on the earth, you can do this. It's possible to do this because this knowing awareness is always there with every human being. So when you're tied into a knot, then start becoming aware of it. Even no matter how tight the knot is, you can realize that this knot comes about because of thoughts and emotions. They are that knot. Thoughts and emotions create a self. That's what that accumulation, that heap of self is. But there is something, this knowing quality in us that allows us to become aware of that selfing. Everybody has that. In that sense, nobody is eternally lost in samsara. So just by becoming aware of this tightness, of this selfing, whether it's a very strong selfing or something very subtle, it's possible to unwind it, untie it. Or I shouldn't say that. It's possible to see through that selfing. Untying or unwinding it would mean shamatha meditation, just calming down, some reaction waning, so that it doesn't actually become seen through. Vipassana means clear seeing. So the experience of having an insight is that when we have this strong sense of self, this selfing happening, just being aware of it, being with it, being, becoming aware of that very reaction, it makes the charge in the anger, in the fear, in anxiety, it makes it releases it. And when that self-charge releases, there is an insight. You actually see that this reaction that was there a moment ago, there's nothing there. It's just selfless space. It's empty of self. And it's the same thing we speak about subject self and object selves in our practice. It's the same thing, always the same. And the result is always the same too. It's just this selfless basic space that knows itself. And as I wrote in the example, I actually stole it from this Zen master whose brief explanation I was looking at YouTube a couple of weeks ago. He spoke of first having no hole in the wall, but then having a little hole. So he used this analogy of no hole, small hole, bigger hole, bigger, 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 until the wall is there no more. So it's just having insight after insight, bhumi opening after bhumi opening. What the Buddhist path of meditation is really about. And whether it's like a sutra practice, meaning there is no gurus or mantras or empowerments involved, if it's just plainly working with our own mind and elements that appear in it, or whether it is tantric approach, the result is the same. What a sutra vipassana practitioner in Theravada Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism achieves is the same in principle as what Tantrics achieve. No difference. In Tantric practice like Tibetan Heart Yoga, Guru Yoga, deity practices, we use the help of Guru, who passes an empowerment, which then allows us to activate these Buddhas, these fully awakened, enlightened qualities of our own mind through applying the mantras. So the technical form of Tantric Vipassana is different to Sutra Vipassana, but the result is the same. Result is always and selflessness, nature of mind. So it's that simple, really. Is this difficult or easy to understand?
Relatively straightforward.
Insight, awakening, or kensho means that part of one's deluded self-based mind becomes permanently deconstructed of the sense of self, sense of me, sense of I. So that sense of being a separate entity, that becomes deconstructed. So what about after that? When we have one or several insights, what then? Well, the Heart Sutra says, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. I said a moment ago that strictly from the Dzogchen point of view, there is no one here. Not even one of us here. This is purely from the plain awareness perspective, from the Dharmakaya perspective, Dharmakaya aspect of Buddhahood. What was I talking about before that?
Emptiness is form, form is emptiness.
Right. So, for example, when we woke up, this sense of self that subject self that was there before, charged with this sense of entityness, it becomes deflated. But even after that, some don't, but usually Buddhists do, they can still refer to me and I and you and we. You know, it's not a problem to use nouns. That's what exactly form is emptiness, emptiness is form means. You can still refer to yourself because, as is very obvious, there is Carl, there is Tom, Matt, Mike, and so on, and Kim. You know, we have our stories, we have our personalities, we have our own lives. It's not like there is no life, there is no personality, there is no story, there is no history. That is just, what is it called? Nihilism? So it's just that this, after the insight, the perception of ourselves is different than it was before. Because there has been a liberating insight, it's different. So you just don't regard yourself, view yourself in the same way as you did before. But it's absolutely no problem to have the self-thought or have thoughts, other thoughts, when if the insight to the empty nature of mind increases, and finally becomes complete. So thoughts are not a problem. It's the self-charge, self-investment in thoughts that is the problem. And actually not only thoughts and emotions, but there is this subtle energy called substrate mind, substrate consciousness, alaya vijnana, that is the basis of this samsaric mind. In that basis, the entityness, the feeling of being an entity, me, is very subtle. It's not obvious at all. Obvious in the sense that when somebody irritates you, that selfing comes up very quickly and in a very gross form. It's easy to realize that, okay, this is selfing. But this selfing in the substrate mind, the basis of the mind, it's a lot more subtle. It's so subtle that most meditators miss it. They don't realize that it's there, even though it is. But this point, being able to separate awareness and substrate mind, is something that I've talked about before, and Dzogchen masters throughout the centuries have given a special emphasis on this point, not to confuse this subtle mind to awareness. And this is also we went through these realms in our session in the morning. You remember we did this experiment with taking different mind states and meditation states and imagining being in different realms, and then always from each of those going back to that knowing, making the shift. And one of those modes that we used was that of deep sleep, dreamless deep sleep. That's where the bedrock of substrate mind is. So I'll just make a brief note about this, that when we sleep, we can have a deep, is it invigorating rest, even if we are not conscious of it. In the morning, if we have deep sleep, we can be quite fresh, even though we've been semi-conscious or unconscious. But did you notice a difference when we imagined that we are in deep sleep, but then shifted to the knowing of that deep sleep state? Did you notice a shift? Not really. Okay. Well, it will make sense later on. But that's exactly the point I'm coming to, is that the selfing that happens in that most subtle mind is very sneaky. And this is also why I often encourage that if you're not sure if you are in knowing awareness, if you're actually practicing Ati Yoga, cut through it with a shout. And it will indicate whether there was something or whether it was already as it is. So maybe I'll just finish with reading that when the whole is there, our everyday life becomes significantly different. A part of our narrow-minded selfing has been permanently removed, so this cannot not have an effect on our lives. Social relationships, work, creative work, and other things in life are met from a more open-minded and less opinionated place. Because selfing no longer happens the same way it used to, how the mind used to think, feel, and react according to the self-based habits, life becomes more direct, more fresh, and more intimate. This is the most profound change we can have. There is nothing that can replace selfless insight, because nothing else will deconstruct the sense of self. A simple indication that one matures in insight meditation is that one feels clear-minded, more clear-minded, open-hearted, fresh, and less reactive in everyday life. Okay. Let's take a 20-minute break there's enough time for a cup of tea, and then practice about half an hour guru yoga before the afternoon break.